Hi, this is Tom Matthews from Friday the 13th, Part 6. You're listening to the Necronomicast.
This is indeed R.E. Lehman, the first Jason Voorhees, right here at Camp Crystal Lake. You know, I just want to say Necronomicast rules, and Jason never dies.
From the haunted heartland in Omaha, Nebraska, welcome one and all to the Necronomicast, bringing you the horror of Hollywood and beyond. I'm your host, Brian Corey, and as I continue to celebrate the month of October, I have an exclusive late-night conversation with filmmaker Vincent DiSanti, because today, his anticipated independent Friday the 13th film, Never Hike in the Snow, is celebrating its release. The movie is available for you all to watch for free right now on YouTube, and you absolutely need to before listening to this episode any further, because tonight we will talk spoilers. We're going to do a deep dive into the cold, murky water of Crystal Lake and uncover the secrets that forever haunt Camp Blood. We will explore the myths and legends of Friday the 13th and dare to dream about where the franchise could go. Never Hike in the Snow with filmmaker Vincent DiSanti. He's my guest on the Necronomicast. And now here we are with another late night conversation on the Necronomicast. Calling in on the hotline is Vincent DiSanti. Vincent, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
Good, man. You're a little bit under the gun as we record this. It's October 11th, and you are getting ready to put Never Hike in the Snow up for the mass consumption of Friday the 13th fans everywhere. How you doing? How you holding up?
Good. I mean, I'm obviously nervous. You know, anytime before screening, I think it goes without saying that it can get pretty nerve-wracking because you don't know how people are going to react to it. But, you know, we've seen it like a couple thousand times now, and we think we've done a decent job. And we've been spending this entire week kind of scrubbing through it and cleaning up the last bit of effects and color and really making sure that we listen to the sound mix and, you know, listen to on different speakers and things like that. So it's been like a week of tech checks and things like that. So we're feeling confident that we've caught every little gotcha in the film. And yeah, now I'm actually on the way home right now to upload it to YouTube and set it to private. Do a couple more reviews of it, and then set it for premiere on Tuesday.
Excellent. And you say you've seen it about 1,000 times. I've seen it twice.
Yeah, it feels that way. Yeah.
I've seen it twice. You sent me the link, kind of a working link to it today, and I watched it twice, and it's great, man. Congratulations.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, I'm kind of known, not to toot my own horn, but I'm kind of known in the Midwest as the Friday the 13th guy, as kind of the Friday the 13th expert around here. So I am really unarmed, though, I think, when it comes to Friday the 13th expertise when talking and compared to you. So hopefully together we can have a good conversation about Friday the 13th and about your show.
Yeah, no, I love nerding out and like meeting other people who like watch, you know, we're the ones who like watch the series and tried to pay attention and wondered why things ended up the way they ended up. And I think that, you know, Never Hike Alone is basically like an extension of that. It's my exploration of like, oh, where could Friday the 13th go? What are the things that it hasn't tried that would actually be really successful? It's like, it's really tough when franchises try something that's out of their boundaries and it doesn't work, and people say like, see, you got to stick and do just the same thing. But, you know, I think in the case of Friday the 13th, it's a lot more, the story content can be a lot more diverse than originally the original formula. So, you know, these shorts and these films are basically explorations in that. And I hope that they're kind of proving that Jason has a lot more room to grow, and he can grow out of the formula and into like bigger and better stories that are only going to add to the lore. And I think, fulfill that, you know, that fan like hunger for new Friday content and understanding more about this character, which, you know, even after 12 films, you can't really like shoot a straight arrow through. As far as like what his continuity, what his backstory is, what he's about, it's like everything kind of changes over time. And I think fans are really appreciative of the fact that we take care of trying to maintain a consistency, and something that I don't think the franchise really has ever enjoyed too much. It's always changed so much. So us having a consistency with the projects that we're doing and brought in kind of a new element to it as well.
What I'm excited about it is that you're actually taking this this universe, and after 12 films, you know, it's a huge universe. There's so much to explore, and yet these movie studios just can't seem to get their act together in terms of putting something quality out. And, we're going on almost 12 years since a theatrical release. I kind of look at your films, your shorts as kind of like a Bates Motel kind of a thing, like the television series. And what I think is neat about your approach, your first film was just roughly 50 minutes long. This one's just about a half hour long, and yet you're kind of taking the story and you're breaking it down. It's a great story so far, and you're breaking it down into these parts. It could totally lend itself to episodic shorts like this, or episodic television, maybe on a Netflix or something like that. I know, money is a thing when you're putting these things together and you're kind of funding each installment episodically. What is your approach like in putting these things together in terms of building the universe? I mean, I know you've got an opportunity to make them smaller, these episodes, and really kind of dive in and explore a little bit, but you've got an endpoint coming up a few films away.
Yeah, no, definitely. That one's called The Final Hike. Basically what we took was a feature film script, and I broke up the 3 acts into 3 different episodes because that made it easier to produce for numbers wise. All together, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're broken it out. There's a couple episodes that can be done for 50, and then another one that can be done for 100, and then probably another one that can be done for 100. But we still have to kind of shape it out and see how much it's really going to cost. And to do it all at once and to really kind of roll the dice that all of a sudden 5,000 to 10,000 Friday the 13th fans are going to show up and donate $100,000. It's a big ask, considering that the most we'd ever raised before was 50. The most people that we get on there was like a few hundred. So we didn't know. And Never Hike in the Snow became like a test for us to try out something bigger, to have a self-contained story that added to our plot, that acted like a prologue, not just a prologue, but also you could call it a pilot episode. And it really kind of set the tone for how we would break it up and how each episode would lead into the next episode, and kind of take it from there. And that's kind of the approach we've taken because, doing it through crowdfunding, there's so much extra work that goes into it. Half the year you're a filmmaking company, and the other half of the year you're a manufacturing company building T-shirts and posters and Blu-rays and shipping them out and dealing with that stuff. And it's 2 separate businesses that are both funded through the same source of income. So it's not like when we raised $100,000, we had $100,000 for the film. $10,000 of that came out right away. That was the Indiegogo fee. And then starting at $90,000, about $35,000 to $40,000 of that went right into the production of all the perks that we had to create, the extra discs we had to print, all the shipping, all the international shipping, and some of the gotchas that we learned along the way about like additional posters. And every time we created an additional box for an international release, it would create more cost. And so sometimes it's like things cost a little bit more than you think they're going to cost. But luckily, because we were so well funded, we had that $50,000 to do the entire production this time. So when we made Never Hike Alone, we didn't have any money at the start. We started it with money out of our own pocket. And it wasn't until we got funded later on the next year, and did some independent funding on our own, that we're able to kind of get these like little short bursts of money to inject production quality into the film. And the difference on Never Hike in the Snow is that we had that money up front. So everything was kind of figured out ahead of time. We didn't have to spread things out, and we put it into about a good 6 days of solid work with a full crew. And obviously, like you saw all the visual effects, you saw the additional kind of production value that we brought to the film, the crane work and just shooting in the snow and getting those vehicles out there and all that stuff. It was it was like shooting an episode of TV. And, I think not only for the films themselves to get a little bit more production value, it's great for us as a production team to be able to produce stuff at that quality and follow the same type of rules and quality level standards that a TV show would. So that's what we want to give fans, is this kind of episodic TV level quality, something that you would see on a CW or even on a Netflix or, on an HBO Max, where it's this episodic content that's building towards a conclusion. And it's all based on the Never Hike Alone 2 script that I know a lot of people really want to see.
Yeah. What I really appreciated too, we call this a fan film, and the whole thing behind a fan film is that you're raising this money. People are like, well, you guys don't own the rights to Friday the 13th. Mm-hmm. No, we're still trying to figure out who does own the rights for Friday the 13th. And we just had Larry Zerner on a couple episodes ago, and he was talking about just everything legally and all that. So when you're talking about a fan film, when I was a little kid, we made a fan film of Friday the 13th, and we called it the Slim Reaper, and we filmed it when we were like in high school with a cardboard mask, a fake mask, and out, and we dug a grave in the woods and just kind of filmed some bullshit. This is more of an independent film, and for people, I understand how you're able to do this, but for somebody just tuning in and they're like, how is an independent filmmaker able to make a Friday the 13th film? It begins with you not making any profit, and you're making this as a tribute to Friday the 13th. Is that kind of the rub?
Yeah, no. So the basic rules are that, like, you can't misrepresent yourself as the actual franchise. I can't release this and say, this is the next Friday the 13th film. We're officially Friday the 13th. There's fan film is within our title. So people know what they're getting as soon as they realize that this is an unsanctioned version of the Friday the 13th story. This isn't officially canon. You can't make any money or profit. You can't make it exclusive. So we can't collect money from people and then only let those people see it. We have to collect money from people, and as a community, make it free and available for everyone to watch it. That's why we put it on YouTube for free with no ads, and anyone at any time, anywhere in the world can watch it anytime they want, and we make no profit from it. When we stepped into the home video release side of it, we kind of treated it like we do the films, like there's money to run the production. There's still leftover costs from the film. So with the home video, we're able to kind of supplant some of the additional personal costs that we put into the film. So we break even. And ultimately on these films, breaking even is actually on the independent circuit, something that's very rare. So fan films kind of, and that's where I think we get a lot of heat, is that we do make enough money to eventually break even. And in the case of Never Hike Alone, it's kind of just fed into the next project. So with the excess money that we finally had from Never Hike Alone, after about 3 crowdfunds and 2 years of shopping it around, I was able to make the Disappear music video for a couple $1,000, and that paid for a weekend in Arizona for us to go shoot that, so we could do the promotional material for Never Hike in the Snow. And, everything that we earn, we have something called a runoff cap, where when we do get the end of a production and we do have some money left over and we can spread it around and we don't necessarily have any more bills to pay, we have the Penny Pines Reforestation Project that for $68 a seedling, we can replant trees in the forest where there have been intense wildfires. And that's one of the first places that we started donating to. The other one that we donate to is the J.D. March Recovery Fund. J.D. March was a director of photography on the first Never Hike Alone, and a few weeks after we completed production, got into a surfing accident in Manhattan Beach and broke his neck. So he's paralyzed from the shoulders down now, and he has rehab, and he's been working back to, he's just been slowly working to get his life back and develop to his new life. And, he's moved back to where we're both originally from, actually, which is Massachusetts. He's there with his girlfriend, Katrina, and they live together, and she takes care of him. And so I would, I definitely recommend people to follow them on social media and follow their story. It's very, very sweet. And you can learn a lot about what it's like living with someone who's, a quadriplegic and the life that they work. So we donate to their cause and help them out with, some funding things because of JD's treatment and things like that.
Yeah. What was his name again?
JD Martz.
JD Martz.
So he was one of the 2 directors of photography on the first Never Hike Alone. That's jdmartz.com. JD .com. And then the last thing that we donate to is monthly. We make monthly donations to the Special Olympics. That's something we started to do, is kind of like a year round. We're always donating every month, because sometimes we have to put a little bit money off to the side because we have something coming up that we got to, more Blu-rays that we have to buy or something like that. And we don't know how much of a runoff cap that we're going to have. So we kind of make monthly donations in good faith. That way, it's just everybody knows that we put as much money as we can into the projects. We're doing as much good with the money that we can when we're not using the projects. And ultimately, with fan films, what it comes down to is how the rights holders feel about fan films. Some rights holders are really stringent about it and some aren't. And Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham have both been on record as saying that they don't mind fan films. And they haven't said anything about the recent surge of fan films. They don't want to get in the way of any of it. They actually, I think, in a certain way, they kind of see how it helps the community, and it's been a nice release valve for us. And I don't think that they want to get involved. So I think as long as each fan film, including us and everyone else, are being responsible with the money that they've been given, because ultimately we're responsible for the fans, and that's where my real concern is, when fans give me money, when they've gone out and they've worked hard and they've decided to give us $20, $25, $40, $100, that means something. And I owe them now product. I owe them a movie. I owe them a Blu-ray. I owe them whatever they purchased. And when they get it, I don't want them to go, oh, that sucked. You know what I mean? It's the last thing I want. So, I mean, that's what I'm most worried about. Like there's no real, I mean, as the more, it's like, who said it best? Like, it was Big Papa, right? He said, more money, more problems. It really is. It's like the more money you have on a production, the higher the costs get for everything. And you really have to be careful, because when you go into these high budget type ideas and you try to fund stuff that's really high budget quality, the money goes fast and you have to watch it. You can run out. And, we made this one by the skin of our teeth. Even with all the money we had, we really we invested it wisely. We got a lot out of it. We got a lot of value out of it. And we invested it in the film, and, everything that we could make better for the film, we did. And, it's something I'm really proud of. And I think when fans turn around and they see the difference in quality between Never Hike Alone and Never Hike in the Snow, I think that they'll see that their money was well spent. We hope they enjoy the story just as much.
Now, you're obviously a very competent filmmaker. What do you do besides make these fantastic fan films?
I've worked in film for about 12 years. I worked in animation for a long time, feature film animation, where I learned both the story development side of it and just the overall production, line production, things like that. They were grooming me towards becoming a line producer, and I was, clawing at the wall saying, please, no, put me in creative. And, it came to the point where I ended up quitting my job so I could pursue this full time. Switching over, I started working on, assistant director sets. So I've AD'd, I've second AD'd, I do a lot of PAing for bigger sets. And I just kind of work as a freelance PA, and I'll do anything on a set. I'll work for an art team. I'll work for a camera team, whatever I can do so I can be freelance, create my own schedule, and then work in Never Hike projects in the background and my own personal projects in the background, and just hopefully give myself enough freedom so I'm not locked down in a job that I have to commit all my time and energy to. But I can go out, I can earn my paycheck every week, and then on the weekends I can work on this and I can raise money for my projects. And as long as I can pay my rent and I can raise money to make my films, I'm in a good place.
Fantastic. And what led you to, Friday the 13th rather than, like a Nightmare on Elm Street or a Halloween? Or what led you to Crystal Lake?
I think it was because I grew up on a lake, and I grew up in the forest. So I watched Friday the 13th Part 6, and I was convinced that Jason was chained to the bottom of my lake. And I would swim out beyond the dock at my grandfather's house, and I would be petrified to let my foot go 6 inches below the water. I would swim if you could call it swimming on top of the water, that's exactly what I did, because I was so convinced Jason was down there. And it used to scare the hell out of me. And when I was in the woods, I was just convinced Jason was going to be out there. I'd always think of the scene with him chasing the paintballers around. And it was kind of like where I grew up. I just felt like I was in that area. And so I think that's where Jason just kind of really gravitated towards me. I loved the hockey mask. I loved all the disc art on the VHS tapes. And it was just a lot of I don't know, it just really spoke to me, and I just loved the films. And I think over the years as I watched them, all the continuity errors were kind of very apparent. I was trying to connect what was going on in this franchise and figure it out. And it kind of led me on my journey of becoming a filmmaker, because I wanted answers for why the films were made the way they were. And it led me down the road of figuring out who was responsible for what and what goes into making a film.
Yeah. Now, when you're dealing with Friday the 13th and Friday the 13th fans, it's important to remember that the word fan is for fanatic, and people that are fanatical. So I hear all the people talk to me all the time about continuity errors, and there's a movie theater, a chain called Alamo, and I don't know if you've got one up in your neck of the woods, but the Alamo.
We do. We finally got one.
Yeah. Okay, so we have one in Omaha, and so whenever pre-COVID, when there was a Friday the 13th on the calendar, they would always play a Friday the 13th film. And I was brought in for these films to kind of introduce them, not do stand-up comedy, but just kind of give a little introduction to film, welcome people to a kind of a party atmosphere, and we're going to watch this movie. And every time I'm always talking about with the crowd what the continuity errors are. They're all over the place. So when you're taking these Friday the 13th films, you've actually done something that I think is great, is that they're in canon. I could pick apart, I could pick things in especially in this new one that we're getting to, this Never Hike in the Snow. I could see different things throughout there that you're attempting to kind of pull everything back in and try and make sense of this mess of continuity and things like that. It's really it's something to behold.
It's not easy, but I think it's more about it's more about shedding weight. It's just focusing on through lines that when they presented themselves in the films, most of the fans will be like, yeah, I like this. I like this tone. I like this story angle. I'd like to see Jason from this perspective. And, that's really my barometer on it. It's just, I kind of just figure out like what would make sense and what was enjoyable and what's not enjoyable, and not try to jam things in there. And then even when it's something that would make sense and you could explain it, if it takes more than like 2 lines of dialogue to explain it and it turns into an exposition nightmare, then I'm not going to spend the time, because it's not worth it. The casual fan doesn't care. And if an opportunity to explain it comes up, I will. And I think that like we present things in these stories that have stories connected to them. And if we get our way and say, say Never Hike in the Snow comes out and the rights release, and somebody sees this and says, you know what, this does belong on Netflix. We're going to do this and we're going to make it real. It's like, I can expand it in both directions. I can go forward with it and I can tell stories in the future, and I can go back and I can tell stories in the past. And I feel like I have discovered a through line that with the magic and the tone of Never Hike Alone and Never Hike in the Snow, I can kind of weave this web that would be the healing blanket for Friday the 13th, to say, this is how it kind of worked. And this is like a perspective of the franchise that you've never seen before. But if you apply this knowledge and this logic, every film would make sense. Not everything, because some of it obviously goes so beyond the pale. But for the most part, you could get like this sense of like, okay, now I understand how this all worked and where this all came from and how this all came to be. It feels like the gaps have been fulfilled, and not in a way that feels like I had to pull some new concept out of left field. I didn't have to borrow from the Necronomicon. I didn't have to borrow from Universal Monsters. I didn't have to really borrow from anything. I'd say the closest thing that I borrowed to was maybe like a Stephen King, in the sense that like, and I think it's all how we kind of feel about Crystal Lake. It's like when you ask like the casual, like whether you believe Jason was human in the first movie or if he's undead the entire time, like I do, everybody kind of has this sense that like there's something about Crystal Lake. And this place is kind of a haunted place. It's this cursed place. And even beyond the realm of the film, that there's something odd about this place. It's almost like a Derry, Maine. And I think that with that type of logic, I've been able to apply these kind of short stories or episodic entries that look at different characters in the franchise and focus on character stories rather than ensemble casts, that tell a little bit more about Jason's story and a little bit more about the town and a little bit more about the curse. And it just keeps feeding into that kind of what we're trying to build into Never Hike Alone, which is this final entry, which feels like a culmination of all these things finally paying off into one final scene that feels, satisfying. That the ending finally feels like, now I feel like I have closure. And that's what we want to give fans. We want to give fans this sense of closure that we've never really had in a satisfactory way, I would say, since Friday the 13th Part 6. I feel like if they cut the series off maybe at Part 6, or if they cut the series off maybe at Part 4, like it actually is kind of a satisfying ending. That would be the end of it. But because they kept it going, it feels like it needs to be tied back down again. And I feel like in the last 30 years, we haven't really received a film that gave us that satisfactory ending the way we wanted to see the film end. We've seen some cool concepts and we've seen some cool one-off films, but I still feel like there's there's these loose ends from the Paramount era that never really got satisfied with fans. And that's ultimately what my journey is trying to find the loose ends that we never got from the Paramount era Jason.
See, that's what's great about it. I really appreciate, I was listening to everything you were saying there. I really appreciate what you're trying to build. It's like world building in a way.
Yes.
Because just the simple concept of making Camp Crystal Lake, or that whole Wessex County, that whole area around the lake, the forest, everything, making it big, is great because it's not just the little Camp Crystal Lake or the Packanack Lodge, or it's not little Higgins Haven over here. It's this whole entire area. It's this whole entire place where, yeah, there were some murders over here, but clear on the other side of the lake and on the forest, there's all this going on. And then Harold and Edna got this little
mom and pop shop.
What? It's clear. It's clear the hell way over there. So you've got this big area of land. So everything's not just crammed into this little spot. It's this whole haunted kind of area. And I'm anxious to hear what you have to say about this, because I haven't listened to a lot of interviews with you, because I wanted to get kind of some fresh perspective and reaction from you. But yeah. So Jason, you just kind of said Jason you didn't think was alive like in part 2. Like he didn't drown, sort of, or anything like that.
No, he did. But in our world, in the Never Hike universe, what we go by is that Jason died in the first movie. So the only thing that is super canon is
he died in the 50s.
He died in the 50s.
Okay.
And when Pamela came back, and we have a story about Pamela, about how she's cursed and how she's haunted, and that's how she ends up going crazy and she ends up killing people. It's her death that brings Jason back. And he becomes the living embodiment of the curse. And what he ultimately becomes is basically an undead version of a T-800. He's a living exoskeleton, living tissue on top of a dying exoskeleton or inner skeleton. And as he takes damage over time, like in the first movie, like he's perfectly preserved because he hasn't been injured yet. He hasn't faced a foe, and we haven't seen him take damage. But he gets his first bit of damage. But it doesn't kill him. He keeps going. And so he is this undead being that can take whatever keeps coming and keep going. But the more, he can take whatever comes to him and he can keep going. But at the same time, he doesn't heal. Or like if he heals, it's a very twisted form of healing. And so as the more damage it takes, the more it peels away his actual mask, which is the fact that he's coming across as human when he's actually this undead killing machine. And that's why he's able to come back every time. And I was actually supported in this theory when I sat down with Joe Zito and I asked him about, what was it that how did Jason survive the axe to the head? And he very bluntly said he didn't. He died. And I went, what? He goes, yeah, he's a reanimated corpse in final chapter. And I went, what? I was like, you never explained this to any of us. We all thought he was living. And he goes, oh, no, that was never the intention at all. And I was just
wow.
like, what? And then it's because at the time I knew my theory stepped away from a theory that a lot of other franchise people have. But in order to make this story work, I wanted to step. Obviously, you've seen the supernatural stuff now, what I'm trying to deal with, and what I'm trying to play with. And so for me, like that was like music to my ears to be like, yes, and I'm continuing this thing that thing that jumped out and pulled Alice underwater really was Jason. Jason had come back at that moment, and he was, the lake was giving him his power. And it basically started this thing. And if you look at the original Friday the 13th, Jason didn't attack anybody until they encroached onto his land, and he was drawn out, and he was pushed, and he was snuffed out of his land and sent on the run. Mm-hmm. And then every other film, he's woken up and he's pissed off, and he goes out on the lam and starts killing people. But it seems that like he's trying to lead his way back home, and he just sees people there. So he's always trying to return to Crystal Lake, but something happens in between and he gets put back down. And so because he keeps getting distracted and he's been pulled away and he's been burnt, he's been drowned, he's been burnt to a crisp, he's been blown up, he's been strangled by telekinesis, all these different things, he's been washed up by toxic sludge. Our Jason in Never Hike Alone is this Jason that has learned his lesson. He realizes that if he keeps this up, he doesn't know how much longer his frame is going to be able to take this, but it's going to keep him away from that thing that's in the attic, and that's his mother. And this connection that he's trying to return to. So instead of going out and resurrecting after Manhattan, he finds a way to get back to Crystal Lake and hunker down and hide. And he becomes a recluse, and he realizes that he just wants to be left alone. He just wants to stay into the camp. And what's helped him, and maybe you noticed this a little bit in Never Hike in the Snow, and anyone who was lucky enough to get a script from us, or download our script for our digital pack, on the back page of the script, there's actually a letter from Rick Colon to the mayor of Wessex County. And it talks about how after part 6, they changed the name from Forest Green back to Crystal Lake because the townspeople wanted to take their identity back.
Okay.
But in the process of doing so, as now Sheriff Rick has requested that all records stating about Camp Crystal Lake, Packanack Lodge, Higgins Haven, um, the and all areas surrounding and in between basically be turned over to police custody. And all of this is going to be taken off the map, and it's going to be marked as a wildlife preserve, and no one's going to be allowed to go out there because we don't want any more trouble, and we want to distance ourselves from, the reputation that we built for ourselves back in this time. And so now that Jason is hiding there and no one's allowed to go there, both sides have been working for each other, and life goes on. And every now and then somebody goes missing. But if you've gone past the fence, it's kind of on you. And there's nothing we can do about it, because anytime they send in anybody to go search for anybody, nobody can ever be found. And so that's what makes this story a little bit different, is that we have one of those characters that requires attention, that people are going to care about, that like, you can't just have somebody go and come away. Like, people have to have answers. And Rick knows that, like, when he shows up at Anna's house, that she's never going to see her son again, but he doesn't want to say the word murder, because then that's going to warrant an investigation. And how is it going to look for a sheriff who can't solve this murder, and this kid disappears? And then what's he going to say? That there's an undead killing machine in the woods killing people? How's that going to look? What's that going to get him for re-election? So he just plays dumb, and he's got to make it look like he's putting on a show, but he kind of deep down knows what's going on. And the only person who can't stomach that in town, or the only one who really seems to know actually what's really going on and wants to do something about it, is Tommy. But Rick doesn't want Tommy to do anything about it, because Rick has the potential. I mean, every time Tommy seems to want to do something, lots of people end up getting killed. So maybe Tommy should stay away, and he should just go away, but Tommy can't help himself. Tommy has to go. And so that's where these two characters don't see eye to eye, and thus creates the conflict for what will be, the rest of the episodes. Like, not only a conflict between Tommy and Jason, but our conflict between Tommy and Rick for how to deal with this situation. And ultimately the unintended consequence, which is Kyle MacLeod. Now, this thing that neither of them can control, Rick's trying to keep people out. Tommy's trying to find Jason and can't find Jason. Neither of these two have the solutions to their own problems. And then Kyle comes in and ruins it all, because he's the one who finds Jason and then lures him out of hiding, and then does the worst thing in the world, and that's lure him into town. And that's what we've set up at the end of Never Hike Alone. And with this series, we're rewinding the clock so you can get a little bit more world building and understanding of who these people are, so that by the time Jason does step into town, everybody means something and you understand their story. And when they actually face Jason towards the middle and end of the movie, that you understand the personal relationships and the personal vendettas that everybody has, and their history with Jason and what they're trying to overcome, and the personal conflicts between each other that they have to overcome in order to overtake Jason, which I think makes it a very comparable story. It starts to make it an ensemble cast. We start to get multiple people who will, and some of them will die. But all of those deaths are earned. And when those characters go, you're not going to want to see them go. It's going to feel like a Stranger Things, or it's going to feel like, a Dark or a True Detective, something where like there's stakes, there's something on the line here. It's not your typical Friday film where you're just sitting back enjoying the murders. You're actually sitting back rooting for people to survive and terrified every time somebody gets it. And, and that's, I think, what the new formula for Friday could be, is, actually caring about these characters and having movies that focus on bringing back the terror and suspense of Friday the 13th, and letting go some of the childish kind of ways of the past.
Well, it's just like with the old movies, some of the ones that are the most endeared and the fan favorites are the ones that actually took the time to take character development and really you cared more about these kids, and then they get killed and you felt bad, especially like in Final Chapter or in Part 6. A lot of those kids are just sitting ducks. I got to touch on your concept of Jason, because I love it, because I talk to a lot of paranormal people, investigators, and research and things. And there's this whole Tibetan kind of concept called a tulpa. Are you familiar with that concept?
Is that like a revenant?
Yeah, it's a lot like a revenant, or it's also like a conjured spirit. It's like maybe, or a thought form. Like, all these things are thought about and contemplated, and they're almost conjured to existence. So you've got this curse on Camp Crystal Lake, or that whole area, and so much pain and suffering. And a great part of your new film, Never Hike in the Snow, we never see the victims' families react to the murder of the family member. You might see a little bit of it at the beginning of final chapter.
In part 4, yeah. When they close the door and that, yeah.
Yeah, like somebody's being comforted when they're told that their family member is dead. But you feel horrible for this lady whose son is missing. And like you said, Sheriff Cologne, he knows the kid's dead, you know, and he's just got to kind of not cover it up so much as just stop what's happening. Stop what, you know, he doesn't want it to get any further. You know, this one guy went where he's not supposed to go. Let's kind of cover it up. Let's not report it. So other people are kind of messing about in Jason's woods. So you've got this kind of conjured spirit of the area. What I think is fantastic, because it explains so much of what happened in all the other movies. Going back to your thing about Joe Zito, that blows my mind that he was actually dead at the end of 3. I just had my own kind of theory that, like, you know, Jason was deformed, you know, obviously.
He had a thick skull.
Yes. And the axe, it went in enough maybe to give him a concussion, knock him out, knock his vitals down a little bit. So they thought, well, this guy has to be dead. And then he kind of, woke up in the morgue, you know. But wow,
that's what I asked Joe. I said, it wasn't the mask and the thick head. He goes, no, I treated it like this. And I was just like, I was blown away for the rest of the movie. I mean, for the rest of like the time I was there, I was just like, I can't believe this. This is like,
when did you talk
sacred
to
information?
When did you talk?
Last year. It was last year.
Just last year.
Yeah, there was a screening of the final chapter in LA, and they were doing an original print screening. I had done some work with Deb Voorhees on her 13 Fanboy film. So I went as a consultant and I did some of the stunts for the film. They hired me as a stunt guy to get tossed around when there were fight scenes. So I got to do some fights and things like that. So that was a lot of fun. And when I was doing that, I actually became pretty good friends with Judy Aronson. And we, when she came back, I was like, hey, that final chapter thing's coming up. Are you going to that? She's like, yeah, I'm a guest. Do you want to come? I was like, I would love to. So I came as a guest with Judy, and I got to sit with her, the twins. I got to meet Lawrence. And then eventually Joe showed up and we all went out to dinner. And that's when I asked Joe actually I asked Joe during the Q&A. I asked him the question.
Amazing.
And that's when it was. And I was just really blown away about it. And I asked him about it later on and kind of went a little bit deeper into it. But that's what I was saying about like him saying that, like, yeah, that like he had died, and he's like, he goes, and to him, it was just so simple. He was just like, because that's what Jason does. He just comes back. And I was just like, wow, like filmmaking was so much easier back then. Like you could just say that and get away with it. You know what I mean? Like it's so simple. Like, yeah, of course he just comes back. Like he never dies. And like Jason never dies. It's like, that's, you know, Tom McLaughlin's new movie, like what he wants to do. And, you know, it's just such a thematic thing. So it's like, what would it take for Jason to never die? And obviously in the parts where I think that like you could say that the better films were the first 4, as far as like the ones that followed the formula, the ones that are traditional Friday the 13th films. Those are the, you know, the set in stone kind of originals. And then parts 6 through 8 are a little bit more of the pop culture films. But that's where Jason found his pop culture iconism, like Kane Hodder becoming Jason, the CJ Graham version of Jason, you know, iconic undead Jason that really became like the larger than life Jason. And it's kind of like, in my view, I'm trying to take the larger than life Jason and put him in a setting that matches like the first 4 with the modern spin. And I think that that's kind of like, I think for me, that's the sweet spot of where Jason is. Not so much concentrating on trying to justify that, like, oh, well, he survived the drowning, but Pamela didn't know. So for 20 years, they were estranged until she got killed. And then he realized that she was still alive. It just feels like it always felt wishy-washy to me. And him being actually dead and driving her crazy from beyond the grave. And I think if you look at the scene now, it's like, I can't tell you how of much of a relief it is to actually just be able to talk about this stuff now rather than dance around the issues of like what happens in the movie now that people have seen it. Definitely spoiler alert. But like when Pamela shows up and comforts Jason in that moment where Jason knows that he's fucked up, he got caught on camera, he had to kill this kid. He knows that people are looking for this kid now and that there's a lot of turmoil, and like, it's not really like Jason's panicking in that room, but like he knows he fucked up. And that's why he tries to leave, because he feels ashamed. And Pamela calls him back and comforts him. And it's the curse coddling Jason, because the curse is the entity in which it strikes. It needs to protect its asset. And so it's, there's a sense of like, yes, that's Pamela's spirit, but is it Pamela? Is it really Pamela talking? Would Pamela really want him to do this? In the same way that when like the story that we want to tell is kind of like, what did Pamela see? What was that voice that she was hearing? And how did the curse do the same thing to her with her son? And the son and the Pamela, like basically the curse drew her back to this camp to create all this bloodshed and ultimately lead to her death, which is what it wanted anyway. And then it used this kind of thing to bring her son back because his body was still tangled in the weeds underneath this lake, and it used it.
Mm-hmm.
And it became that like supernatural aspect. And as he rises from the lake that next morning and attacks Alice, it's really kind of like this waking up after 30 years of being dead and slowly getting accustomed back to the world in a way. And that's how we get our part 2 Jason. And our ghost Jason is a little bit of a regression back to our part 2 Jason, which is something, this entity that even though it is unexplainable and beyond the real world, it's still trying to exist in the real world. And that's a little bit about what the Disappear music video was about this entity that's forever alone in this cycle of violence. And it's, if we think about Jason, he was always the outcast who wanted to fit in. And anytime Jason sees like, groups of kids having fun, he goes and ruins their fun and then returns and he's alone again. So he never really gets what he wants. And it's this really sad story. And I think it's not so much trying to create too much sympathy for Jason, but realizing that the curse is making a victim out of everybody. Obviously the people who get brutally murdered are the worst victims, but there's a character flaw to this villain. And this is its flaw, is that it's not Jason and Pamela weren't born out of evil. They were turned into evil because something evil happened to them. And so it's kind of this sad story. And it's very, I think it's very poetic and tragic.
I think you can even take like this whole concept of the curse of the area, and if you wanted to, you could go back like 200 years to the early settlers of the land, and there was...
Oh, dude.
Yeah, what am I
singing my language, man? No, but I mean, no, nothing that I have planned now. But it's like I want to go back and I want to go to the 1930s when the town was founded.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the bloodshed around this area of land that people were probably fighting over, and how the Christies ended up with it in the first place? I think that that's its own Bloody Sunday story. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like they probably murdered like all these like natives that were living there type thing, and really make it like it's just been this place of violence since the beginning of time. And like I said, like Derry, Maine, it's just, there's something about these waters that makes men's blood boil. And, it turns people against each other, friends forever, all this. It's like, and I feel like when the camp was there, there was so much light and love and acceptance at this camp that these people weren't distracted by the camp's, spell, as you could, so to speak. Like finally the Christies took it over, they found happiness, and it only was until this boy showed up who was an outcast who was by himself that this camp's power was able to isolate him and eventually lure him into that water and kill him. And I think that like, and it ultimately setting in chain of a moments, knowing that like this woman with this child was ready to snap, and all this curse and this entity and this evil needed to do was just set her into motion. And what better way to send her into motion than to take away the only thing that she loves in this world and the only thing she has left to live for. And I really think it's a powerful story for Pamela, if I ever got to tell that story, to go through the unraveling of her psyche and how she grew into the Betsy Palmer character that we saw in the 1980 film. And, I think that's a story that fans deserve to see. I think that, Pamela being the matriarch of the franchise, she has had her one film, and she got a snippet in another film, and she got somewhat of an appearance in Freddy vs. Jason, but we've never had Pamela's true story. And I can't say that I, as a fan, have really been gravitating towards anything that I've seen as far as like the types of stories I've seen told about Pamela. Mm-hmm. There's a common theme of like her being abused. There's a common theme of Jason being, a child of rape. And I feel like those are things that I've heard a lot in other stories, but I've never heard in the Friday the 13th story. And I never considered Pamela to be someone who's the victim of an assault. And if you look back in some of the old records and interviews with Pamela, she is Pamela, but Betsy Palmer, she talks about how Jason came out of a situation that came out of sex out of marriage, out of wedlock. And so it was two young lovers who didn't wait until they were married. The girl got pregnant and the guy denied it and left her to raise the baby. And that seems to make a lot more sense. And when you frame it in the world of 1940 and 1950, you have a young single mother who's had sex out of wedlock, who has a deformed child, who has been banished out of the family by her family because they're super religious. And everywhere she goes, she doesn't find many accepting people. And everywhere she goes, she has to manage both a life and a child. And you can imagine that life with Jason isn't easy. And they have to move on a lot. Things happen where, you know, just because of the way Jason looks and just because of the way that they're perceived, they get accused or they get just ran out and they just don't feel welcome anymore. And, you know, for me, Camp Crystal Lake must have been that place where after all these years of searching, they were finally welcomed in. They finally found a home that was theirs, and it was a beautiful place. And, you know, Pamela had a good job, and Jason, you know, even though he wasn't really, you know, probably not mingling all the time, at least he was around other people. And, you know, at least people were trying to accept him. And I just feel that, like, something in that world, when those kids weren't paying attention and he was drawn into that water, like, everything changed after that.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine a woman after all those years who's been raising this child, who's been persecuted and set aside, that when she's told that there will be no repercussions for the death of her son, that's a breaking point. That's something that any mother or parent can understand, that if you were told that there were people responsible for your son's death, I think it's very relatable, you know, in Never Hike in the Snow, in real life right now, that no one's taking responsibility for all of this loss of life, and no one seems to be able to want to shoulder the blame. People lash out, and Pamela lashes out, and that's why she's such a symbol of that kind of the persecuted. And that's where Pamela really comes from. She comes from a place where she was pushed so far. That's who she became, but that's not who she was born as. And that's not what was in her heart. And that's why this makes it such a tragic story, is because ultimately Friday the 13th is a product of love. Two characters that loved each other so much that one killed for them and the other one came back from the dead to avenge their death. And I think that frames it story-wise as one of the most beautiful stories ever told. And that's why I always think Friday the 13th has been underestimated in the sense of the types of stories that can be told about these characters if a little bit more care was taken and you actually concentrated on story development rather than just trying to hit the formula and hit the time frame of, okay, every 5 minutes it's either boobs or blood. You know, I think we can go beyond that. And I think that fans will reward us for it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because if you want your TNA and things like that, well, you've got Friday the 13th, part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know, I mean, we have those, and you can always go back. Scream Factory just made a beautiful box set edition of everything. You can go back and enjoy those films as much as you want. But I think it's great that you're actually taking like the story, because it's a great story. Think about the tragedy that is set up. This woman with her child looks all over for the perfect job to raise Jason the best she can by herself. She finds this camp where she can cook and keep an eye on him. Jason is able to kind of hang out at the camp. You know, it's a perfect kind of situation, and the perfect place, the perfect situation just so happens to be this area that has this huge curse over it. I mean, it's awful.
And he's susceptible. And it's funny because at some point they're going to say, you got to let Jason play with the other kids. You got to let him fit in. You can't just like stay on top of him the entire time. And she's like finally lets him go to go play with the other kids, and he dies. I mean, so she's got to be wearing some of the guilt herself too, which also makes it sad. And then you describing that story, it reminded me of a woman in Never Hike in the Snow, or Anna, Diana character. It's the same thing. She moved to a place to find a safety net for her son and herself, and she ends up losing him.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be some parallels with that character. And I think that, you know, she has, you know, Diana's character in the first film, I could understand criticism where like people would want her to do something, but first of all, she doesn't have a car.
Right.
The battery has been ripped out of her car, so it's going to need repair. But she's just so overwhelmed with grief, and that she needs this episode. The only thing she needed to do was grieve. And eventually we're going to see her take up a mantle, and she's going to become just as important as Kyle and Tommy. And so even though she kind of serves like this singular purpose in the movie to kind of tell Mark's story and add to Mark's story and understand who these people are, she's coming back. And, you know, I really felt that was important to say, like, here it is again. Like, the cycle is repeating itself. Now another young boy has been taken from a single mother. And, you know, and kind of that, like, the hypocrisy of Jason in a way too. It's like the mother and son embracing them after the mother has been taken. I mean, the son has been taken from the mother. It was definitely very purposeful in those choices.
Amazing. I just watched it just a couple hours ago, and you peeling back that onion a little bit. I didn't grasp how much more of a character that she could have in this. That's exciting. I'm like, wow. Now, so
I'll give you go ahead.
Well, okay. My other thing, in the special features of number 6, when that was released, re-released on DVD and Blu-ray and whatnot, Tom McLaughlin actually had Crash Cunningham, who designed our podcast logo.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Crash is the best. So, had Crash Cunningham draw these scenes of bringing back a concept of Elias Voorhees. Do you have any interest at all in like exploring what happened to Jason's dad, or is Pamela's story just? Oh, okay. I was going to say, is Pamela's
story is actually Pamela's story involves Jason's father, but in a much different way that I don't know if I want to spoil it, and it's in a much different way than I think that has been presented to the world thus far. And again, I think it's kind of my looking outside the box and following. I mean, I guess that, like, I mean, the scene that in question is basically at some point we see Pamela kind of after the moment of losing Jason arrive back in this town, arrive at a home, find a man home on the phone with his wife, you know, saying, I'm coming up to, you know, I'll be at your mother-in-law's in a couple hours. I just got home from work. I'll pack up and I'll meet you and the kids. And then there's a knock at the door, and the guy opens the door. Pamela Voorhees is standing there, and he goes, Pam? And she just goes, hi, Eli. And he's like, what are you doing here? And meanwhile, he's got his wife on the phone. He's got his hand over the thing. And she goes, I just came to tell you that your son is dead.
Oh, wow.
And then goes to leave. And then from there, they have a conversation. And it's kind of, in a way, the beginning of her unraveling. And she goes to the last person in her life that loved her was this man, was this person who said that he would be there forever, who, you know, gave her that class ring that she wears in the opening film. That's the whole story behind the class ring. And that, you know, this guy was supposed to be, they were going steady. And she gave herself to him, and he didn't stick around for the consequences. And what happened? He went on and had a life. He has kids. He has a wife. He has a job. You know, nothing ever changed for him. Nothing ever changes for the men. It's just the women. But in the same time, it's not really like her coming back and condemning him. She's happy that he found a life. And, but you know, through the course of it, you see that, like, she's haunted by something. There's something happening to her, and she doesn't know how to explain it. And kind of in a situation where we did the Vinny Diana scene, it would be the Pamela Eli scene where they're talking, and you can kind of flash back to what happened, and you could jump around time and see how life developed for her and tell her story through this conversation that she has with this man who ultimately abandoned her, but had the right to know that the person that he brought into this world is no longer with them.
Powerful,
right? And it's different than, oh, he's a rape baby.
Yeah,
you know,
or like we did a long, in-depth discussion. Me and my friend Doug, we were talking about the Aaron Guzikowski script and how they handled Elias, and I wasn't too impressed.
Nope.
With that at all. The Guzikowski treatment of kind of Crystal Lake and everything that's going around there. So when they announced, I was totally bummed when they announced that they're not going to make that film. But now in retrospect, I'm like, well, I'm glad they didn't make that film. I don't think that it's just not that interesting. You know,
we dodged a bullet.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
We actually, like, we should have got the Nick Antosca, David Bruckner version. That's the movie I wanted to see. They missed out. We all missed out on that version.
I know.
If they said, hey, Vin, we're not going to let you make a Never Hike Alone movie because we want to make that version instead, I'd be like, that's good. I want to see that movie too.
And I've had Nick and David. I've had David on the show this year. It's been a couple years for Nick being on the show, but we were talking mostly with Nick about, let's see what was going on at that time. Channel Zero was coming out, his work with Hannibal and everything. And then I was following everything that was going with his script and everything. And at the end of when we were done with the phone call, he's like, well, do you want a copy of the script? I'm like, well, yeah. So he sent it to me like that night, and I read it.
Yeah.
I like spent a couple hours just reading it, and I was like, damn it. Why wasn't this film made? It was incredible, especially the ending.
I know.
So,
well, I have a tremendous amount of respect for those two. I think they did a really good job. I even think David had a really good idea for his full found footage one. I think that was really clever what he came up with. Like, he's somebody I look up to. I mean, when I heard he got attached, I started following his career. I went back and watched all of his old films, and then kind of followed him as he did The Ritual, and now he's doing Hellraiser. And I believe he just did something else that's going to get released soon.
Yeah,
he's very talented.
He's a great
Super
filmmaker.
talented.
He's got such an eye, and he's such a young talent. Yeah, he made a
He's
film.
got a good story too. Yeah.
Yeah, he made a movie called The Night House, and it's actually it's been picked up by Disney, and it's just in COVID hell. I mean, it's done, it's ready to go. It went on the circuit, for film festivals and everything. It's getting it got great reviews.
That's great. Good
it just
for him.
hasn't gotten a go ahead for the wide release date. They're still deciding when they're going to open up theaters again, I guess. But yeah, those two guys got it. And I didn't hear his treatment on the found footage. Did you get it kind of a...
No, he talked about it on the Best Films Never Made podcast.
Oh, I'll have to check
he does
that
a great...
out.
He definitely check that out. He talks about both versions. It's really great. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I'm just a Friday the 13th nerd. I like hearing stories. Like, I got into an argument with a couple big Friday the 13th fans on Twitter the other day. We were talking about, they were talking about the tunnels from 2009, and I'm not a big fan, so I kind of clapped back out of it just to just have fun. And we started talking about well, I mean, it doesn't make as much sense as him taking a bus with his mother's head to wherever Alice was staying, and just to hunt her down, how he figured that out. But if you read the novel, Alice had returned to Crystal Lake,
right?
And so I was like, no, he was in town. He just walked out of the woods and got her. And so it's funny to I always just love the fact that you can keep digging so deep in this, and there's so much room for wherever the stories can go, and everybody takes it a different way. It's so funny how people think about it. Somebody actually thought for all these years that Jason took a bus.
Yeah, right. With a sack on his head.
With a sack on his head, or he's going to get on the bus without the sack on his head. No one's letting him on a bus.
Right. Well, it goes back earlier in the conversation. This Crystal Lake area, this whole thing where this world, this universe it's huge. So yeah, she moved back to kind of confront her demons. She kind of said something to that effect at the beginning of the film, and Jason found out where she is, and he creeped around at night and went to her house. And
have you seen the part 2 cutscenes?
No, I haven't even opened up that DVD yet, or that Blu-ray yet.
Yeah, they're good. They're really good. Although I got to say, the only thing I was disappointed is on the last thing. And I won't spoil it for anybody who doesn't want to watch it, but they do a pushing on the Pamela head.
Okay.
And they do an extended version of it, but I thought it was going to have the smile in it.
Oh, the
and
smile.
It doesn't.
Okay.
I was really hoping for that, but that's got to exist somewhere.
Fantastic.
Because I swear I've seen it. I swear I swear I saw it, or I've just imagined it. And I want to see if it's what I imagined in my head, that I saw it on TV once, and then maybe they aired it on TV once and they never aired it again, type thing.
Hey, I have to tell you though, I was watching Never Hike in the Snow. I like when they're kind of the cop was rooting around, and they're rooting around the place and everything, and they find a stash of hockey masks, and I was thinking well, that makes total sense, because there's the Roy one with the blue chevrons on there, and I'm like, well, that makes tons of sense, because if it was a kids camp, they've got to have a supply of hockey masks and sticks and pucks and things like that for all the kids that play in different sizes. So yeah, so there's the blue chevron one, and I think underneath it, did I see a red chevron mask laying underneath it?
It was black. So they had black chevrons.
Okay.
But they had the traditional look to them. So yeah, so we wanted to kind of there's a story behind that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wanted to show that we just wanted to introduce the concept, they had a winter camp. They had an idea to do a winter camp. And if you look at the box says Winter Camp 67. And if you remember the lore of Friday the 13th, they tried to open the camp in 62 and 67, and both were met with sabotage. But that doesn't mean that equipment wasn't brought to the camp, that there wasn't some work being done. So I kind of played off with that, using that area to say, okay, I can introduce these props and say they were introduced at this time, which explains why the masks look this way, because in 1967, this is the way that Goalie masks look.
Yeah.
And so it really helps set it in the time period. And that's what the time period mask I wanted it to be, because now it's 2017. So like Jason taking a mask off of somebody in town would mean that he'd have a brand new mask. So giving him an excuse to have this mask, because we never tried to say that this is the original mask from the film. The original mask, where like the Shelley mask, was destroyed in part 7.
Mm-hmm.
But technically, you could say that the Shelley mask might be in a evidence bin somewhere, and that the part 6 mask is something that Tommy brought with him. We don't know where that mask came from, or where it's never really explained. So
Sure.
there's room for growth.
I just assumed that the part 6 mask Tommy made, just like, he was so good at making the masks back in 4 and 5, and so he just had this picture of Jason that haunted his dreams, and so he just one day just decided to make a mask.
So that mask, as we know, was destroyed in part 7,
right.
And then the mask that he magically finds in part 8 gets destroyed in part 8, and so he needed a new mask if we were going to continue the story, and it wouldn't make sense if he had his old mask. So that's where the Ghost Jason mask come from. But that little pile of masks has a story to it. There's a character that interacts with those about maybe 20 years prior, during the events of Manhattan. There's a side story that we'd like to do eventually someplace down the line called The Defeated. And it's basically about a drifter that finds his way into Friday the 13th. If you could imagine like the opening of First Blood. It's like the opening. It's like basically First Blood meets the random drifter that shows up in part 5.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah,
and
that creepy guy that has to go clean the shit out of the pigs.
Yeah, it's to clean the shit. But imagine if like that clean the shit guy was a little bit more together. He was just an army vet trying to make his way through life. He came back kind of messed up from war, wanders into this town and finds work, good honest work on a farm. Somebody's going to allow him there, but he's got no place to stay. And one day as he's camping out in the forest and just living off the land, he finds an old cabin on the side of the lake and starts to make it his home. And he realizes there's a lot more cabins around, and he starts to kind of root around and look around. And, eventually he's living in Camp Crystal Lake. And it's around the time that like Jason went missing in Manhattan. So there's this period of time when Jason's not there. So throughout the whole time, you see this guy, it's like a story about a guy kind of coming to terms with the life that he's lived, the memories that he has being in war. But at the same time, there's this oncoming storm that eventually Jason's going to show up. And what type of condition is Jason going to be in? Because he just got toxic sludged. So it's kind of a different Jason. And it's like the origin story of like how our Jason that you see in our films came to be, like what his origin story is. So it's not only the story of this, this army vet who's dealing with a lot of tragic memories. And again, like this camp has lured him in. It's this person who's broken that's now lured him in and kind of got him in the cast, in the grip, so it can feed on whatever misery it has. And it turns his kind of fears against him in a way. And you kind of see the camp existing in a way that you haven't seen it exist before, where it's pushing the boundaries of reality. And it's kind of cool. And then Jason eventually comes back in the story, and he becomes kind of like this entity. And it's this really cool, like thing. It's again, like with in Never Hike in the Snow, where we showed Jason having this fever dream about his mother, and the comforting, being comforted in this moment of failure in a way. It's kind of the same thing. It's like the way this camp can project and make people see things that aren't really there.
Just when I think I am knowledgeable on Friday the 13th, and I think I got it all figured out, I talked to somebody like you, and you're blowing my mind with this stuff. Now you've got this film that, as people are listening to it, it's out on YouTube now. We're putting this out like the day after it's up. So it's up, everybody. Go, if you stop, I hope you stopped listening before we started talking, and I'll put that in the synopsis for the show. But so you've got Never Hike in the Snow done. Now, if people are going to go and watch what you've put together so far, do you want them to watch Never Hike in the Snow first, or do you want them to start in release order?
I mean, it's really, they probably want to start with Never Hike Alone. I think they should watch Never Hike Alone, and then they should watch Disappear, and then they should watch Never Hike in the Snow. And watch it. I mean, then that becomes an hour and a half of entertainment. And understanding that Never Hike in the Snow is a prequel, even though it comes before it. It's kind of nice because what it's building into is what's coming next. And I think that's, I'm really excited for where this is going to go. And the stories that we're going to get to tell now that we've established these characters. Tommy Rick, Jason, and now Diana, this mother who's lost her son. And we're going to see her kind of grieving process throughout the series. And since she works at the hospital and Tommy's an ambulance driver, their paths will cross in a very interesting and unique way.
Yeah, because last time we saw Kyle, he's in the back of the ambulance getting driven.
That's correct. So the next film is gonna kind of rewind the clock too, and we're gonna see kind of like the day in the life of Tommy Jarvis, and we're gonna answer the question that everyone wanted to know after the first film, which is how did Tommy find Kyle? And there's a really good story to it, and it's worthy of its own episode. And I think fans, again, they're going to get that satisfactory, like, okay, this is how it played out, and all those things that we didn't get to see in Never Hike Alone, like Tommy fighting Jason outside of the cabin, all the deaths outside the thing, and then finally, like, more of a fight. You know what I mean? Like, where does it go from there when they start walking down the road? Like, there's a little bit more to that part of the story.
Yeah.
So I think we're really excited about being able to give fans that answer that they've wanted to see and what's coming. And then we kind of turn a corner on the type of the size of the films that we're going to make. And we turn around and we make the film after that called Jason Takes Crystal Lake. And that's when we start to get into our body count film. And it is an impressive body count, and we want to do a lot of really fun stuff. We have really unique ideas on how to do, singular kill scenes, massive kill scenes. And we got a lot of blood to spill. And so that would be a very expensive episode. So we're hoping to build momentum over the course of time with Friday the 13th fans to say, over 2,500 people, backed this film, and we were able to raise $100,000, and we were able to build a $50,000 budget out of that. Imagine what would happen if we had 4,000, Friday the 13th fans, 5,000 Friday the 13th fans that didn't have to give a lot. $5, $20 between 5,000 people would be enough to really get our funding to a place where we can start making big chunks of these movies and fund some of these big ideas. And I think with Never Hike in the Snow, we wanted to prove that when we have the money and we have the big ideas, that our big ideas are worth investing in. And we're going to give you story. And then when it's time to give you the blood and the gore, we're going to give you that like you've never seen it before. And I feel like that Blood Angel kill is something that I hope it goes down in the history of Friday the 13th is one of the coolest kills of all time, because I think it is. That was something that I think I had in my head for a long time. It's that image is what drove this entire movie. It all started with that image. And I'm glad that I was able to make it happen. And then bring something to that level of like, we're all gorehounds. We're Friday the 13th. And sure. I wanted to do that and Never Hike Alone. You know what I mean? We got our head crush, which came out great, but we didn't, this was another level, and it was brutal. And we wanted to show how brutal a kill from Jason could really be. And I think that that's something that we proved with this, and that there's only going to be more of that going forward, that we can promise you.
So do you take a day off now that you got it out, or are we starting to fundraise, or like, what's a timetable that you're looking at? I know there's limitations what you could do with COVID and everything else, but I mean, are you right back in the saddle, or what are you envisioning?
The plan is that we still owe our backers from the original campaign. Now that the movie is out, we can do our home video campaign fulfillment, send off the Blu-ray to get made. That's about a 4-week turnaround. And then, from there, we can start shipping. And so we believe that it's our responsibility to fulfill our previous campaigns before we start a new campaign. And we have our campaign that's the final call that was kind of the last round of it. But we're only going to make 2,500 copies of Never Hike in the Snow first edition, and then we're going to cut it off. So we're kind of watching the numbers right now. We still have a few hundred left, but we're basically going to cut it off there. That way, all the Blu-rays that we order there will be, spoken for. We can get those out to people. And eventually what you'll probably end up seeing is a new Indiegogo in March of 2021. We'll know a lot more about our situation with COVID then. That's going to give our producers the winter to break down the budget for what we're going to need, where we can film. We're going to start scouting locations. We need to add a hospital set. We have another location that we need to go check in with and see what their cost is going to be. We have some work to do on the camp because we have a lot of the film that takes place at the original camp. And then we also have some shooting to do out in the forest. So we need to go we're going to redo the ambulance scene. So there's going to be part of that. So we just got to kind of do our due diligence just like we did last year, but I am going to take a couple weeks off. I'm going to go home, see my family, back in Massachusetts, enjoy the holiday season, the holiday season we all love, which is the Halloween season. And then, when I come back, I'm going back to work, and then I'm going back to work for everyone to get them their Blu-rays. And, we'll probably reveal the cover of the first edition we'll reveal it to the backers who have seen it, and we'll put a big spoiler warning on it. But we think you're going to love it. It's Bill Hunt artwork. It's beautiful. I'm going to release a teaser for the disc, sometime this week as well. So I think people are really going to enjoy that. And, and I hope they're excited for what we get ready for next year. And so we'll crowdfund in March and hopefully shoot it next June and July, which will be a good time to shoot, especially if we're still kind of in COVID restrictions. Being in warmer climates and warmer times helps. And we'll have to do our research for being COVID compliant, but I think we'll be able to do it. We've worked on several sets now that we've made it work. And luckily, a lot of this can be shot, not guerrilla, but with small crews. Small cast. It's usually one or two people on screen at a time. And I think we'll be able to execute this film next summer and get that out for next fall. And then do the same thing all over again. Then we fulfill, and then the next year we come back and we do Jason Takes Jason Takes Crystal Lake, and so on and so forth until we get this thing done.
Well, Vincent, as one crazy fan of Friday the 13th to another, I just got to hand it to you, man. I think the franchise, it's not official, but I think it's in great hands with you. Man, these shows are wild, they're imaginative, they're creative, and I like everything that I hear from you as a fan, as a guy that's making these films. And it warms my heart to know that Jason's being taken care of.
Good. And hey, maybe if the rights finally come up and they need a TV show or a streaming series, they could give us a call.
It's, you've just given about, let me look at my countdown here, about an hour and 10 minutes. You've just laid out over and over again a million reasons why this should be some kind of, well, it is in your hands, this episodic serial continuation of the story. It absolutely lends itself to these streaming formats. I don't even know if I want to see a full-length feature film in the theater as much as I want to see this wild explosion of the story and the universe of Friday the 13th. I mean, we're talking about the curse of Camp Crystal Lake back in old settlers times. We're talking about, you
could do almost like you could almost do like an American Horror Story. Each season could be about its own kind of series of events, which I think would be really interesting. And you could go all the way back to settler times. You could do that. I think
the curse originated somewhere,
Yeah, where did it all begin?
Sure.
And and it's like, and you can always tie Jason in somehow. But at the same time, I still think they need to do feature films too. I think when they go back to the theater with the feature film, they have to have at least a 3-film arc. They have to have a trilogy.
Yeah.
They got to figure that out, and they got to come up with a beginning, a middle, and an end, even if it means a reboot. Or, if it's a reboot, they really got to figure out what works for Friday the 13th and what doesn't, and really not like handcuff themselves in the first film to a slow death. I kind of feel like the 2009 film didn't give them a lot of room to grow. It just, I don't know. It seemed very pedestrian in the way that it was constructed for long term. And maybe they would have fixed it in the next episodes, and they would have just kind of breezed over the events as if, Jason got away and they don't have to explain anything that they did in the first one, which, Friday the 13th never felt like it had to anyway. And you could argue that. But I think fans were, like myself, were kind of like, yeah, I know you got away with it before, but now you've had some time to think about it.
Yeah.
And we're asking you to put a little bit more thought about it. Like, you respect the fact that the 80s films, you were flying by the seat of their pants. They were just constructing the plane as you were in flight.
Yeah.
And
that's part of the charm of them too. That's part of the charm, the history of how they were put together, man. I love like the what's it called? The Crystal Lake Memories, the book, and the wonderful documentaries that have been produced about it too.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Well, look, man, Vincent, I absolutely enjoy your work. I've had a great time talking to you. I hope sometime to actually physically meet you in person sometime, and then I will talk your ear off about Friday the 13th and everything else horror related, man. I
would love to. I mean, when the con circuit really gets back out there and we're allowed to travel again, definitely come seek me out, man, because I'll sit at the table and talk Friday all day.
All right, man. Fantastic. Everybody, this has been Vincent DiSanti. He's the man behind all these great Never Hike in the Snow, Never Hike Alone, Friday the 13th fan films, I guess you could call them, but just wonderful independent cinema by a guy that's bright and creative. Vincent, thanks for your time, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Well, there's another episode of the Necronomicast. Recorded, produced, mixed, conceptualized right here in Omaha, Nebraska. You got to hand it to Vincent. Hard-working, and the guy knows his Friday the 13th. 13th. While Hollywood tries to figure out what's going on with this franchise, it's up to these independent artists to go out there and get the job done. And I totally enjoyed everything that Vincent has put down in the universe of Friday the 13th. And I look forward to everything else he's got cooking up in the future. Speaking of cooking up in the future, be sure to check out our Halloween episode of the Necronomicast coming up on October 30th. Putting the finishing touches on it right now. And in the meantime, you can go to our website, necronomicast.com. You can send me an electronic mail. You can also call the show. The number's right there, 24/7. I don't care. Maybe I'll pick up. This was episode number 189. Is that right? 189? My goodness gracious. Copyright 2020. All rights reserved. Now go get some sleep.